President Donald Trump's second term unfolds, several high profile allies, such as Elon Musk, Mike Waltz, and Pete Hegseth, have already hit turbulence, whether from policy stumbles, political missteps, or party infighting. But there is a figure that has been quietly rising all of this time: Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Once seen as a fading star of the GOP, Marco Rubio is gaining traction within the Trump administration without generating many headlines. Joining us, Michael Montgomery, a Reagan-era foreign policy veteran, to help us understand whether Rubio's quiet rise is a sign of growing power and how it might be connected with his future political ambitions. Hi, Michael. Thank you for joining us today. Let's start with the big picture. As others in Trump's orbit flame out, Marco Rubio seems to be gaining traction. What do you think explains this resilience? Is this just longevity or something more strategic?
Well, I think it's a couple factors, and longevity plays a part in this. 14 years in the Senate, you learn a lot of things. And clearly has. He's gained a sophistication about his party, about DC, about the bureaucracy, and about foreign affairs that's not characteristic of the other second Trump administration crew. And I think that more than anything else is what's causing him to gain power and jobs, even as other people, stars, are not rising.
Let's compare him with Musk and Hegseth right now. What do you think is the main difference?
Well, I think what's kept Hegseth in his job, very honestly, and the president pretty much said this, is a fervent desire on the part of this president not to give the press the satisfaction of members of his administration being forced out for things that the press reports, as opposed to things that he finds uncomfortable internal to his administration. I think, very honestly, I think once we get a little further from the public attention on things like the text ring, I think Hegseth will vanish before long. In terms of Musk, I was honestly surprised that partnership lasted as long as it did. I mean, here you have two absolutely monumental egos who have been in command for years of business organizations that do their bidding pretty much without question, apparently, and how they were ever going to survive in a superior and subordinate relationship was a true mystery to me. At the same time, I think he's a very smart guy who really is not very politically sophisticated. I think he's more politically sophisticated now than he was. And you see him walking back over the last few days the worst of the things he said and tweeted about Trump and the policies of this administration and that big, beautiful bill of the Republicans. Because very honestly, I think he kind of remembered the degree to which his companies are dependent on federal contracts. And he has seen evidence. I think he's been reminded of the degree to which this administration is willing to use the federal contracting process as a means of punishing people and organizations they perceive as their foe. So we're just kind of walking things back. But the other thing about Musk is his whole value, the whole value of the Doge process to Trump was as a way of potentially working around Congress and affecting expense reductions of a magnitude that Congress could never deliver via a vote. And when Musk failed to be able to even propose plausible cuts of the magnitude needed, his star fell some. When the bulk of the when how they went about that process was largely invalidated by the courts, his star fell a little further. And then when they modified and then the change in the estimated savings from $3 trillion to about 150 billion, boom, he crashed. His value to Trump essentially zeroed out then as anything other than, sort of a lightning rod to take some of the lightning strikes and heat. So that the partnership lasted as long as it did is surprising. But again, as a special federal employee with a 120-day limit, it could end with less controversy when it ended than it might have previously.
Some high-profile conspiracy theorists are saying that this Trump and Musk political drama was planned and actually very strategic. What do you think?
I'm pretty sure I can't imagine Musk didn't have a plan. And I think he achieved his most fundamental objectives through the Doge process, which were putting to rest the various investigations into his various companies. That he was able to do pretty successfully. And that's not coming back. He was somehow able to convert white South Africans into refugees. That was achieved. That they're not going to pull that back. But in terms of Trump and this administration planning crises, no, I think when all is said and done, they're too impulsive. About I think the biggest conspiracy they're likely to be able to mount, they have mounted in the sense of putting a cork in the various legal difficulties of various members of the administration. One thing you got to remember, and this gets bringing ourselves back to Secretary of State Rubio, is that the whole Mar-a-Lago documents case began because public records were not properly relinquished at the end of the presidential term to the National Archives, which, by the way, controls the long-term declassification process. Who's the archivist? Marco Rubio. He's one of Rubio's 4 current jobs, of which I am aware, is being the acting archivist of the United States of America. The archives receives all the public records, including presidential records. And in fact, in some ways, the Mar-a-Lago business was a tussle between the archives and the post-Trump presidency, in which the Justice Department and the FBI were simply the foot soldiers implementing. And that, that implies a level of trust of Rubio that I don't think people fully appreciate without going back through Mar-a-Lago to get a sense of how important that job really is. Now, if I put my political scientist, analyst of good government and public policy hat back on for a second here, that's why the archivist needs to be a longer term appointee than a single administration with genuine independence, so that the public record cannot be manipulated or simply have big parts of it empty, big parts of it excised. But Rubio's the archivist. And I think that's a show of faith. Another important thing to remember about Rubio is he had probably one of the best confirmation processes of all the Trump appointees who are subject to to Senate approval. Want to know how many senators voted against Rubio? None. It was 99-0. The zero was because his previous seat was vacant at the time. His appointed successor would have questioned, who came along later, would have unquestionably voted for him. And now part of that is the old norm of Senate courtesy. Senators generally are confirmed by the Senate with bigger vote totals than non-senators. But in this administration, there's such a mixed bag of appointees. That's kind of a seal of approval on Rubio that other appointees don't have. I mean, he's also the acting administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, the source of food and medical assistance to a variety of other countries. The Trump administration has made cutting that off a priority. And Rubio has been presiding over essentially the shutdown of USAID as an organization and the eradication of its programs that will lead unquestionably to loss of life. Probably has already. And yet he has managed to do that in a way that has not caused additional attention and additional public difficulty. And then there's the big side job. So we've alluded to his main job being Secretary of State. We've touched on being the acting archivist. We've touched on being the acting director of the U.S. Agency for International Development. His other side job is being National Security Advisor. The National Security Advisor runs the National Security Council staff, which basically is the secretariat for the president. The thing that receives, back in my day, it received literally paper that needs to be considered and signed reflecting policy choices. They still staff that process, which I suspect is more electronic now. So as National Security Advisor, he's managing the now much smaller staff that is the process through which options for action come to the president, whether they're from the Pentagon or the Treasury Department, or the Department of Agriculture, for that matter, because the NSC staff really runs all the decision process. There's no analog to it on the domestic side. That's one of the little known, the idea that people are going to change the food. They're going to, if somebody's proposing the administration do something with regard to the SNAP program, it would go to the White House through the National Security Council, which seems a little odd, except they're essentially the highest level, most formal element of staff. So as Secretary of State, well, and by the way, with a president that doesn't take the daily intelligence briefing, his National Security Advisor, who's also his Secretary of State, takes it on his behalf. So Rubio has a more complete picture of what's going on in the world than any other member of the cabinet. He simultaneously controls an agency, the Department of State, that doesn't just implement American policy, but defines how we understand the world, defines what we know about the people and governments of other countries, and defines the options for action in many cases. So then he signs off on that. Then he puts his National Security Advisor hat on and receives the recommendation into the White House and moves it forward for action. He's become tremendously powerful in a quiet, unassuming way. And that is the key to survival in Trump world, is to not upstage the president while loyally implementing his agenda.
He really does know how to play his cards, it seems.
He does. He he
Uh-huh.
he he does. And it's, and as someone who has in fact run for president himself, it's not that he is by his nature a shy or even humble person, but he is an exceedingly shrewd person playing a long game. And I think that long game points to 2028 as a traditional, he's got good credentials from his time in the Senate as a traditional Republican. Yes, pretty far right of center, but nonetheless your basic pro-business traditional Republican in a somewhat more extreme form because he comes from Florida. At the same time, he's successfully navigating in MAGA world and accumulating power in MAGA. He's also likable in his own kind of way, in ways that the vice president is maybe not likable. I think Marco wants to be the 2028 nominee, and his path for getting there is developing the gravitas that people develop when they're Secretary of State and do a even remotely appropriate job of it. And he's functioning with dignity in ways that perhaps other members of the cabinet are not always functioning with dignity. He's, he's starting to look more like a Secretary of State. And secretaries of state over the long history of the United States have not infrequently become president. Less so recently, but over the long sweep of American history, it's pretty common. Jefferson, for example, was Secretary of State. John Quincy Adams was Secretary of State. It was back in an earlier period a fairly standard path. And the other thing is he's smart, he's educated, and he's not odd, for lack of a better way to put it, in ways that other members of the Trump cabinet are odd. He's not toting around ex-spouses with him. He's had one spouse, they got 4 kids, they live together. Um, he's playing a long game.
Do you see Marco Rubio as more qualified for running for president compared to Donald Trump was in the beginning? And if that does happen, what do you think would be some of the major shifts that would happen within the GOP, considering his longevity in the party?
Oh, I don't think there's any question of that. I mean, anybody any of the Republicans in the 2016 or the 2020 race were more qualified to be president than Donald Trump. They had actually, 2016, he was the only major candidate who had never served in government in any way, shape, or form. And that's not an advantage in being president. And he would have been unique in that. I mean, Washington was the first president, but he had commanded the Continental Army through a revolution. Adams had been vice president before being president. Jefferson had been Secretary of State, and on and on and on. There's just no question by any traditional definition of qualification. Rubio was more qualified and may have been the most qualified candidate on the Republican side, but he was young and short and he didn't get traction. I think key players within the Republican Party and particularly within the donor class could see Rubio as kind of a path back to a Republican Party that is more sustainable.
We are running out of time. I
Yes.
have a final question for you. What should we be watching out for when it comes to Rubio, subtle shifts, alliances, or decisions? We are running out of time, but I have one final question for you. What should we be on the lookout for when it comes to Rubio? I'm talking about shifts in alliances, policy proposals.
Well, I think I think the thing to watch with Rubio is um, will really have to do with how he deals with the Spanish speaking world. I think there are people who have been long term supporters of Rubio who, if he continues to toe the party line that we America needs fewer brown people by any means possible, I think he will erode some of the support that he would need for 2028 ambitions. At the same time, he needs to not get in trouble in the short run, and that I think is going to be the big thing to watch.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. It's always a pleasure.